have been easy for Samuel to say, without knowing the voice of the Lord, oh, this one's got to be it. And the Bible even tells us that Samuel thought, oh, this has got to be it. Well, this one's got to be it. But it was the voice of the Lord that told him no. Every time the one passed by, no. The next one passed by, no. And the voice of God led him to David, who was in the field taking care of his father's sheep, who definitely did not look or smell the part of the next king of Israel. But because he had a sensitivity to God's voice, he was able to know what God's will was at that time. And besides that, it wasn't even time for David to take the throne yet. So what he did was something very unconventional, if you will. And it took knowing God's voice to be able to fulfill God's will at that time. Also, Timothy, wasn't he ordained the first bishop of the early church? Does anybody know? I read something in a commentary that said he was one of either the first or one of the first ones ordained in the church at the time. I could be wrong. Somebody check me and let if I am. But either way, even if that's not the case, as Sister Kami pointed out, Timothy definitely was a powerful and effective evangelist in his time. And thanks to the time that Paul took to teach and instruct and guide him in the work, he was able to do a lot for the Lord and be very instrumental in the early church. And here's just something interesting that I always find interesting anyway about Elisha. There was a group of folks going by who had a man that they were going to bury. And they threw this dead man on top of Elisha's bones, and this man came back to life. You talk about an anointing. Even in the grave, his bones were still anointed. Powerful man of God. Surely, no doubt, because of the influence of Elijah's influence in his life. Of course, we know that's not the most important thing that happened with Elisha, but to me, God still used him, even as a dead man, to raise somebody else from the dead. And then, of course, Joshua, that I didn't mention, Moses and Joshua was another good example of a man of God who instructed and guided another younger one underneath him. And of course, we know that Moses did not get to actually inherit the promised land. He got to see it, but he didn't actually get to live there and dwell there with Israel. He died just shy of the promised land. But once they crossed the Jordan, there had to be a man who was able to carry them, keep them going to inherit the land. Fighting wars, driving out inhabitants that God told them that they had to drive out. That man was Joshua. And no doubt, because of Moses' influence in Joshua's life, the Bible even says that toward the end there, God said to Moses that he needed to encourage and strengthen Joshua. And we see the results of that when we read the book of Joshua and all the conquests and feats that they accomplished in their going forward in the promised land. So I want to ask us tonight, are we willing to let God use us to influence someone that way in the ways and the work of God? Are we willing to be influenced in the ways and the work of God? Because no doubt, even the most seasoned of us still has something to learn from the Lord. Yes. So we should always be open to receive as well as to pour out into someone else's lives so that they can be effective, so that God's will in the earth can be accomplished the way that he desires it to. I'd like for us to just take a moment now to pray before we close our service, and then after we finish praying, I'll turn it back over to Brother Emmons.